Hello everyone, 2357 here and welcome back to another video. In today's video I am going to be discussing the mob spawning attempt, how it happens and when it happens. Now, as you might know, it's not fixed when a mob spawn attempt happens, so it's not once every certain many ticks, but it's random, and for every chunk there is a 11 over 2000 chance for a mob spawning attempt to happen. This means that on average, spawn attempts happens around about every 10 seconds in every chunk. This doesn't mean that mob spawns can't happen more than or less than 10 seconds apart. They can happen like one game tick apart as well, but it's rare, and usually you'll see a 10-second delay between spawn attempts. And if you have the entire simulation distance 6 spawning range, that is 61 chunks, so the average time between spawn attempts in the entire simulation distance 6 spawning range is 3 game ticks. So when you're walking around, the game does try to spawn mobs almost all the time. This 2000 over 11 probability is for an entire chunk, but how does the game decide it for one block? Well, it actually chooses a random xz coordinate after it decides it's going to do a spawn attempt in the chunk. So it looks at the chunk from the top and chooses any of one of the 256 blocks there. So the probability is 256 times lower than that a spawn attempt will happen in one block than the entire chunk. So on average you will need to wait around 39 minutes for a spawn attempt to happen on one specific block. Now you might be wondering that it has to decide between all these layers of the blocks that you can also have, but that's not how it works. And as I said, it looks at the chunk from the top and decides a random xz coordinate. Then the spawn attempt starts from the top of the world and goes straight to the bottom. And say that it does a spawn attempt here, then a mob will spawn here, it will go down, it can't spawn here, so it will go down air blocks, and it will go down until it finds another spawnable block, and it will spawn a mob here and then spawn a mob here. It will keep going down until it finds a place to spawn a mob and it won't stop if it does spawn one. The game's choosing a random x and z coordinate only and then doing a spawn attempt on every y coordinate there has a lot of implications in mob farming. For example, if your farm has say 40 layers, then the top one will spawn a mob and the bottom one will as well, but soon enough the cap will fill up, and after the 17th layer you won't really be spawning any mobs because the cap is full already. That's why having too many layers in a farm might not help. For a GMF, the maximum number of layers you can need is 17 per xz coordinate. Now this 17 layers maximum is for any mob farm that spawns a mob every layer, but some mob farms like creeper farms don't spawn mobs every layer because if it tries to spawn a zombie it gets blocked, and if it tries to spawn a skeleton it gets blocked. So you might need more than 17 layers in those kinds of farms, which blocks some mob. Another reason why this mechanic is very important is button shifting. If you have a mob farm that uses buttons to block spawns, then having them all in the same block, a mob spawning attempt happening here will fail in all of these layers, while a mob spawning attempt happening on this block will be successful in most of these layers. Now the issue with this is that if you have a farm with more than 16 cave layers, then a mob spawning attempt happening here can fill the cap in the first 16 layers, and the layers below it will not receive any mobs at all, so they will be useless. While if you alternate the buttons like this, then you can have up to 32 layers and you won't exceed the mob cap in one spawn attempt. So even if your farm is less than 16 layers tall, you can still benefit from button shifting. And the way it works is, in this farm, if you imagine it having 10 layers and full chunk layers, so 50% of the spawn attempts will spawn 10 mobs, while the other 50% will spawn 0 mobs. But in this one, 100% of the spawn attempts will spawn 5 mobs, and if you have some basic understanding of probability, then this one will cap out a lot less often, because basically you would need multiple spawn attempts to cap it out, while this one can cap out in only 2 spawn attempts. If you don't trust me, you can work out something with the probability 11 over 4000 happening twice in a row and compare it with the probability of something happening 11 over 2000 4 times in a row, and you will see that this one really does cap out less often. Now the last thing I want to talk about is herd sizes. Some mobs like zombies do like to spawn in groups, and you can find their herd sizes in their JSON files. And some mobs like creepers don't like to spawn in herds, so their herd size is just 1. Now the thing I wanted to talk about is the distribution of these herd sizes. It's not even, so guardians can spawn in herds of 1 to 4, but 1 guardian is more common than 2, and 2 is more common than 3 and 4. And if the distribution was even, then the average number of guardians you would get would be 2.5, but the actual average is around 2. If you want to learn about how the game decides what herd size it's going to spawn, then I'll explain that in a bit. But if you don't care about that, then you can skip this part, because it's not really that relevant and it's a bit complicated as well. Well, anyway, this is the formula that Rufus Atticus told me about, and the u there is some random number generated between 0 and 1, and as you can see it's being squared, so that's what makes the distribution uneven. Say the maximum minus minimum was equal to 1, then u squared would need to be greater than 0.5 to spawn the maximum number of mobs, and u squared being greater than 0.5, u itself would need to be greater than 0.7, and that means that there is a 70% chance that the game doesn't spawn the maximum number of mobs, and there is only a 30% chance that it does. That's why spawning the maximum number of mobs is way less frequent than the minimum one. And even if the maximum minus the minimum isn't equal to 1, if it's 2 or 3, then the same logic applies, and the maximum is much less frequent than the minimum. And that's all for this video. I hope you all found something useful, and if you want to learn more about mob farming, then consider joining our Discord and subscribing. Also, if you have any questions regarding what was said in the video, then you can ask me on Discord as well.